Very warm welcome to this joint Politics Society, International Development Society event, discussion, and the topic tonight is trade not aid, question mark. What role can trade play in international development? We've got three speakers with us tonight with varying backgrounds, and so they're going to start with a few opening remarks, and then we'll go into the audience session with discussion and questions from the floor. So starting at this end, we have Mark Lancaster MP, Bishop Shadow International Development Minister in Westminster. He's been an MP since 2005 when he won his seat, Milton Keynes North East. Previously, he was an officer with the Queen's Gurkha Regiment in Hong Kong. Then he worked in the family firework manufacturing company. Currently, he serves in the Territorial Army. In 2006, he served in Afghanistan as a major, but he's also served in Kosovo and Bosnia. And within Parliament, within Westminster, he's active in a number of all-party parliamentary groups. There was quite a list, from Nepal to China to the US to university to football. He's a Milton Keynes Don supporter. They do exist, apparently. And the one that I thought would sound most interesting, the all-party group on beer, which exists apparently. Next to him we've got Patricia Ferguson, MSP. Prior to her election to the Scottish Parliament, she worked in the National Health Service and the Scottish Trade Union Congress, and in 1999 was elected to represent Glasgow Maryhill. In the first Parliament, she served as Deputy Presiding Officer under Sir David Still, later going on to be the Minister for Parliamentary Business, running the 2003 Scottish Parliament election campaign for Labour, and then after the election she took on the role of Minister for Tourism, Culture and Sports, and it was in this position that she took responsibility for the Scotland-Malawi partnership, and it's her particular area of expertise. And of course Malawi is the destination for former First Minister Jack McConnell next year as British High Commissioner there. Since 2007 she speaks for the Labour Party in Parliament on culture, quite appropriate for someone who describes herself as a fan of galleries and museums, but also Europe and external affairs in the Parliament. And she's very active within the cross-party group on international development, Palestine and a number of others, as well as being involved with the Scotland-Malawi partnership. And lastly, we have Dymond from the Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund, SCIAF. And SCIAF, according to their website, work in 20 countries across the world, and in their words, helping the poorest people, regardless of religion, to work their way out of poverty. Abby, prior to her current position, was at university in Wales, Aberystwyth, the University of Wales, Aberystwyth, where she studied politics and development studies. Yeah. I got that right. Great. Okay, so that's our speakers for tonight. I will pass over to Abby to begin with, and then we will work our way along, I think, and we'll hear what they'll have to say, and then it's your turn. So please join me in welcoming all of our speakers.
Okay, well, thank you very much both for the introduction and also for inviting me to sit on panel with such interesting fellow panelists. I know we've got something to add to this debate tonight. What I've been asked to do is just kind of give a brief overview of the issues of aid and trade, really from an NGO perspective, and then also to throw in a bit of a comparative account and a bit of a comparative analysis between aid on the one hand and trade on the other. So that's what I thought I'd do in the kind of 10 or 15 minutes that we've got available. And because I've also recently been doing some work on Zambia, I thought I'd take a few minutes to talk about the work we're doing there in relation to trade, and also to illustrate some of the points that I'm making tonight with specific reference to Zambia as well. And I'll also try and make a few points on Malawi, as obviously this is of keen interest to many of the people here tonight. So to start off within this debate of trade versus aid, I think it's really important to actually define what we mean by trade, and to start just to disaggregate the topic and really the definition of it somewhat. And I think for me there are kind of two key areas that, as NGOs, we would be focusing on, we would seek to comment on. And the first one of those is really a traditional concern of NGOs, which is the international trading system, the way in which different rules, different institutions operate, but also the way in which key players within them, individual countries, but also lots of countries, operate, and importantly from a development perspective, how that impacts upon developing countries for better or for worse. So I think that's one way in which we tend to talk of trade, but I think it's also important to remember that it's not just countries that trade, it's also companies, in particular multinational companies. And it's for that reason that I think it's also important to focus on issues of corporate accountability, issues of corporate responsibility, and the impact that that can have on developing countries too. I think having maybe disaggregated the issue a bit, I'd like just to start by clarifying kind of SCIAF's overall position on this topic. And I should perhaps say I'm maybe not representing all NGOs, but perhaps really just speaking from SCIAF's particular perspective as a faith-based and Catholic organisation. Our perspective then is really that the benefits to be had from trade, if trade is handled properly, outweigh the benefits that could be gained from aid. And I've got a statistic here that I think illustrates that quite nicely. It's been calculated that if Africa was to increase its share of oil exports by just 1%, this would result in an additional $70 billion for Africa, which is roughly 5 times the amount the continent currently receives in aid. So by that measure alone, you can see that trade has an important role to play. And this was really quite powerfully reinforced when I went to Zambia recently. And I took the opportunity to meet with several ministers, and also the former finance minister. And she said to me, and I'd like to quote, because I think it's a brilliant quote, but it's really, really interesting. And she said to me, Zambians, we don't need a revolution, we are simply asking for a fair share. She said, you cannot have a country as rich as Zambia, it's rich in copper, rich in natural resources, when the people are so poor, when women are delivering on floors, when children are sleeping in trenches, and when husbands are living on a miner's wage. She said, we are not asking for luxury goods, we are asking for a chance. We are asking for our way to earn our own way out of poverty, and not to rely on aid. And in a minute, I think I'll come on and discuss some of the ways in which Zambia is prevented from earning its own way out of poverty, and just discuss some of the ways in which the international trading system can be improved and can be made effective for all members. But I think maybe before I do that, I'd just like to say a few words about the importance of aid, because to say that trade is important is not to downplay the importance of aid. Clearly it's crucial in its own right, and it makes real changes to people's lives. I don't think that you mentioned, but when I was in Uganda recently, I visited several projects that SCIAF runs, and I've actually met people that wouldn't be alive today if it was not for SCIAF aid. And that's a very specific example of the work SCIAF does, but it's also the work that other organisations do, including DFID, including other multilateral organisations, in improving healthcare, in handing out ARVs, in doing all that sort of really important work. Sorry, antiretroviral drugs, which help to HIV/AIDS. So I think it's really important that we recognise aid has got an important role to play, both in its own right, but also I do think as a source of temporary income, while countries are still struggling to gain the benefits that can be had from trade, aid can play a really important role in helping these countries meet the Millennium Development Goals, and at the same time, laying the foundations for long-term growth, and also laying the foundations which means they can benefit from trade in the long run as well, what we tend to call aid for trade, as opposed to aid against trade. I think from our perspective, however, a key problem with aid is that there simply isn't enough of it. So we know it works. We know that developed countries, including the UK, committed to give just 0.7% of their GNI as overseas development aid back in 1970. But we also know that this hasn't happened. The UK government at the moment currently gives 0.5%, and the UK government is in many ways an international leader on this issue, but it still isn't meeting its commitment. And of that 0.5%, nearly a third of that is debt relief, that is, if you like, double counted within the aid budget. Another potential issue